May the words of my mouth, the meditations of each heart be holy and acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. When I was a kid, my family would make a big, long road trip every year from our home in Dallas to my dad's family's farm in southern Indiana. My parents would fold down the back seat in our 1980-something Chevrolet station wagon. They'd pack the luggage around the perimeter of the back, throw a blanket down, and that would be the designated space for my little brother and I. And inevitably, and I don't think we're the only siblings that did this, I think you can identify, inevitably at some point in our journey, Jake and I would draw that invisible line down the middle, marking my space and his space, and even if a pinky toe past the boundary line, it would elicit this explosive response of, "You're in my space, you're in my space." Because the working theory was, there wasn't enough space. There was a scarcity of space. Scarcity is an idea that permeates much of our lives and our culture. The idea that there's just not enough. It's been there for quite some time, right? The Jewish imagination captured it at the very beginning in Genesis. God said, "All right, Adam and Eve, you have everything you need. Everything you need. You have enough. Just don't mess with this tree over there." Well, look what happened. I guess everything they needed wasn't enough. And just look back a few months ago, March and April, when shutdowns began due to COVID-19. And you could walk into any grocery store all over this country, and what did you see? Empty shelves. Why? The idea of scarcity. What if there's just not going to be enough? This didn't bother me until one day it was hot and I had a hankering to whip up a pitcher of margaritas. This isn't top shelf stuff I'm talking about here, just a quick and dirty recipe Erica and I like when it's hot and the kids are crazy, or you have company coming over last minute, or you just get through working in the yard, and it calls for a can of limeade concentrate. Well, I went to the grocery and lo and behold, guess what? There's not a single can of limeade concentrate in the whole joint. And I thought, you know what? I've been patient with these people. I've been patient with these people when they bought all the eggs and all the milk and all the bread and all the meat, but when you come between me and a pitcher of margarita, you have crossed the line. So I went home all despondent and discombobulated, and I told Erica, what are we gonna do? There's just not enough. And she said, ever so lovingly, of course, get over it, I think you'll survive. And I did. Just barely. But less humorously, scarcity exists in a very real and painful way in our world. According to the World Food Program, 795 million people do not have enough food to maintain a healthy and life-sustaining diet in our world. A big factor in opening public schools in the midst of this pandemic is the reality that for many kids in this city and across our country, school is the only place they will receive any kind of proper nourishment, because at home, there's just not enough. Scarcity is real, and it exists, but will it get the last word? Will scarcity get the last word? Here's something I've come to believe, and I want to suggest to you this morning. If we believe the fundamental character of God's creation is scarcity, our fundamental action will be competition, and there won't be enough. But if we believe the fundamental character of God's creation is abundance, our fundamental action will be compassion, and there will be enough. And by abundance, I don't mean opulence. By abundance, I'm talking about a type of abundance that acknowledges the provision of God, the kind of abundance that our passage from Isaiah talked about and the psalm reading talked about, where we get to be the thankful recipients from God of enough. This idea is not rooted in some political theory or elaborate economic system. No, this is rooted in the life and teaching of a Jewish rabbi who a little over 2,000 years ago healed people from all walks of life, created community wherever he went, and showed us a vision of radical love and hospitality and generosity. And there hasn't been a season or an era in world history since that hasn't had a need for that vision to be embodied by imperfect, flawed, and messy people like you and me. And this morning, we get to catch a glimpse of that vision in this strange cosmic conversation between scarcity and abundance, and between competition and compassion. Because Jesus is tired. He tried to get away for so much needed rest, but he just couldn't. The crowds followed him and they pressed in on him, and the gospel says he looked upon them and he had compassion. Being instructed to move the pulpit. Fun times. Jesus was tired, and the crowds were pressing in on him, and the gospel said he had compassion for the crowds, and he cured their sick. He had compassion for them. Then the two disciples come to him and they say, Jesus, look, it's getting late around here, and these people are tired, and they're hungry, and we're tired, and we're hungry, and, James drew the short straw, so tacos are on him tonight, and there's like a Walmart 2 miles down the road. Just send these people to Walmart. They'll figure out dinner for themselves, and let's get out of here. Can you see it? When you believe the fundamental character of creation is scarcity, you send people into the marketplace to compete with one another and fend for themselves. But how does Jesus respond? What does Jesus say to the disciples? He says, you give them something to eat. But wait, Jesus, there's just not enough. All we have are these 5 loaves and 2 fishes. So here's where people have all kinds of thoughts. If you believe what Jesus is about to do is a miracle and loaves and fish mysteriously multiplied, great. If you think it wasn't a miracle in that sense of the word, great. I love the words of Will Willimon when he writes, the task of proclaiming the gospel is not about historical accuracy, it's about theological clarity. So if you believe this was a miraculous event, or if you believed it was something else at work, the theology is the same because it's all going to come back to abundance and compassion. So here's how I like to imagine it, okay? Jesus sat everyone down. That's what our gospel reading this morning says. In another gospel of the same story, it says he even made them gather into smaller groups. And when you do that, the extroverts will eventually start showing you pictures of their kids and talking about their hometown. But all of a sudden, a sea of anonymous faces becomes these small embryonic communities spreading across the crowd. So Jesus blesses the loaves and the fishes, and he breaks them, and he gives them to the disciples, who then break them a little more and give them to other people. And witnessing this action, I like to imagine a person in this group says, well, I have a loaf of bread or 2. And that individual begins to break what he or she has apart and share with their group. And then this individual over here, maybe it's a woman from Cana, she's got half a fish, and so she breaks half of her fish and starts sharing it with her group. And then all of a sudden that starts happening. That action is happening across the crowd, and slowly the crowd begins to imitate the compassionate actions of Jesus. And by the end, all ate and were filled. So maybe the miracle that night wasn't just that over 5,000 people ate, but also people who'd been sold a bill of goods on scarcity, embodied the compassion of Christ, and began to see how abundance works in God's creation. Many years ago, Eric and I worked at an after-school program. It was at a middle school that served a population of kids that were growing up in disadvantaged homes and neighborhoods. And transportation was often an issue, so several of the students were reliant upon us to take them home. One evening, I got to run Lewis home in my pickup. And Lewis was a kind-natured kid, and he had 4 little brothers and sisters. His father was in prison, so obviously was not in the picture, and Mom was barely in the picture. Their house had 3 sides, the 4th being a tarp. We pulled up, and he pointed to this open package of peanut butter crackers sitting in my cup holder, and he asked, can I eat those? Of course I said, yeah, man, they might be a little stale. And right when he was about to take that first bite, he stopped himself. And he put the cracker back in the package, and with a smile, he said, I better share these with my brothers and sisters. And I watched this dirt poor kid walk into his ramshackle house to split 2 crackers between 5 siblings. I watched that kid walk away, and he looked like Christ. I want to ask y'all a question this morning. Is there a place in your life when all you see is scarcity, but God might be trying to show you provision? And scarcity plays in our lives in all kinds of ways, in so many ways. And right now, maybe especially, our lives are turned upside down a bit, and we've lost a sense of what normal was or what our life used to be like. And we have these rules, and we have these regulations, and we have this distance, and we think this is not enough. And life feels kind of scarce. So is there a place in your life where all you see is scarcity, but God might be trying to transform that and show you abundance? Or is there a place in your life where you are competing? Your life is marked by this constant competition, and God is trying to teach you how to be compassionate so as to create abundance in another person's life. Family of God, we live in a culture that tells us there's not enough, so you better compete. But we follow the teachings and are to imitate one who tells us there is enough if we're compassionate. The one who, even these 2,000 years later, may still be looking at his disciples and all of our worry and all of our concern and all of our tiredness and confusion, and he's saying, you give them something. You give them something. The one who, even these 2,000 years later, is still trying to transform our vision of scarcity so that the last word may be abundance.